If you were to ask someone or Google what the first novel was, you'd likely hear either one of these two answers: Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes or Genji Monogatari by Murasaki Shikibu. But first, we have to define the word novel. I find the most satisfactory definition to be a long-form narrative written in prose as fiction. After all, people have been writing poetry and plays that are fictional and narrative long before they were doing it in prose. These two novels were written in the years 1600 and 1000 respectively, and it might therefore seem that the answer is clear. Genji Monogatari is the oldest novel. After all, there's a 600-year time gap between the two. How could it not be? However, you can still argue that it's Don Quixote if you're focusing on the Western tradition specifically, because the Japanese novel wouldn't have any influence on Europe until a lot later. But what if I told you that both of these answers are wrong? That they are in fact both lies? Calirho is actually the world's first novel, with yet another asterisk that it's the oldest extant one. There could be older ones. Paper degrades, and things are lost to the ravages of time. If it's not copied down again, then it's lost forever. Books that are written in verse are easier to preserve than the ones written in prose, because it's easier to remember them by heart, due to the rhythm. Prose doesn't have that luxury, and they also tend to be longer. However, I don't think there's any evidence of a work which would predate this, as in mentions of older ones in other works. Today we have 5 complete novels from ancient Greece, and this is the oldest one. Calirho was written in the middle of the 1st century AD by Chariton of Aphrodisias. We know he wrote it because he introduces himself as the author in the first paragraph of the book. He does state that he is the secretary of a lawyer, which we can see reflected in the book itself because it contains a lot of legal drama. So it seems the adage, write what you know, is as old as time, or the world's first extant novel at the very least. The entirety of the novel survives only in one 13th century manuscript. However, researchers have uncovered older fragments from the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, which is how they've been able to accurately date it. Though we have now answered one question, a new one arises. Why does nobody talk about this book? I mean, the world's first novel? This is the literary genre which has been dominant for the past few hundred years. Both Genji Monogatari and Don Quixote are masterful in their own right. However, you can't deny that their allure of the status as the first has certainly helped a lot in keeping interest alive. So why does nobody talk about it? Well, first of all, it wasn't really properly published until the 18th century, but I don't think this really explains why it has been so widely ignored since then. I have a few theories as to why. The first being that the ancient Greeks didn't really care much about this. Why? Because to them, rigid structure was synonymous with good writing, and this novel doesn't have that kind of rigid structure that the ancient Greeks were so fond of. They thought that a tragedy had to be like this, and a comedy had to be like this, and you had to write it with this exact meter for the poetry to be good. Essentially, they thought that rigid adherence to genre conventions and rigid structure was what made good literature. They were synonymous to them. This view is extremely different from the one we have today, where genre is this wibbly-wobbly thing that people can define on their own, and people are constantly debating whether this work is this genre or whether it's actually that genre or not. This is all to say that no one was really influenced all that much by it, so it's kind of a dead end. The second reason I think it's been ignored is that even though it doesn't contain any supernatural elements, it's still very extraordinary. Last year I got really into Arthurian legend, and so I read Le Morte d'Arthur. Sorry for my French. Having always heard that Don Quixote was the world's first novel, I was really quite confused when I saw that Le Morte d'Arthur had been published just under 100 years before, even though it completely read like a novel, and it even felt very modern in some ways, with having multiple characters and all these different perspectives. It was in prose, and it was a long-form narrative, but it wasn't considered a novel. Instead, it was seen as a chivalric romance. So why are chivalric romances seen as their own thing, and not just novels in their own right? Why are they seen as a predecessor? I suspect this is because when the novel came in vogue, everyone was obsessed with realism, and all this fantastical, extraordinary events thing wasn't gonna fly. Don Quixote is a parody of chivalric romances after all. You had to describe the world as realistically and meticulously as possible, and anything else wasn't gonna fly. This very rigid adherence to "this is how you do it" is very similar to what we looked at with the Greeks. But now that you know a lot about literary history, you don't know anything about the book itself. So, Kellerho, should you read it? Yes. It has war, adventure, drama, comedy, love, even a love triangle. Multiple, actually. The novel is about Kyrieus, who falls in love with the eponymous Kellerho. She is so beautiful that she is compared to Aphrodite multiple times throughout the novel, and Kyrieus himself is also a looker. He's compared to Achilles. Though Kellerho has a whole bunch of suitors waiting to make their proposal, and their families are against it, Eros, the god of love, intervenes, and the two get to marry. This is a quick aside, but after Kyrieus is told that he can't marry Kellerho, he gets really depressed and stops visiting the gymnastics hall, and it's stated that all the other young men in the town stop visiting it too, because they can't look at Kyrieus anymore. But love comes at a price, and that price is all the angry suitors who didn't get to make their proposal, and feel really annoyed about Kyrieus getting together with Kellerho. All the angry suitors come up with a plan. They trick Kyrieus into thinking that Kellerho has cheated on him. Kyrieus is extremely gullible and naive, and so he believes them. He comes home, he kicks Kellerho in the stomach, and she dies. At this point, you may be thinking that Kyrieus sounds like a dick, and he kind of is, but that's sort of part of his whole character development throughout the novel. Though everyone in the town believes she is dead, and they bury her, she is actually alive. She just fainted. Kyrieus gets put on trial for the murder, but he's so distraught and so good-natured that he's forgiven. But that is not where it ends, because a bunch of grave robbers show up and they dig up Kellerho, and they decide that they're going to try and sell her into slavery. Eventually, Kyrieus discovers that the tomb is empty and that she's not dead, so he decides that he's going to try and find her. The rest of the story is them struggling against the world to reunite with each other. It's hilarious, heartfelt, and each chapter is scarcely above 3 or 4 pages, so it's a very short read. The edition that I read was only a little over 200 pages, but it was also in Norwegian. An English translation was released in 2010 by Stephen M. Traskoma, and there are 4 older ones, with one of them being in the public domain. My sources were the English Wikipedia page and my university lectures. I think one of them is probably a bit more reliable than the other. Thanks for watching.